بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. نرحب بالحضور الكريم في جلسة اليوم والتي هي
In the name of God most merciful, today we will be talking about international competition and its implications on the Gulf-Chinese relationships within this platform organized by the Arab Center for Research and Policy Studies. In this session, we will have three participants, and we shall start with the first paper submitted by Dr. Kadem Hashem Naama, discussing continuity and change in Chinese policy with Arab Gulf countries and the effect of the US, how continuity and change affect the future of the three-party relationship between China and the Gulf and the US, and what strategies are being used to achieve these goals. All of these questions will be answered by Dr. Kadem Hashem, Professor of Political Sciences in the University of Baghdad. Please go ahead. In the name of God, most merciful, most gracious, I would like to thank the Center for organizing this event, as it always does, giving everyone opportunities to discuss international policies and showcase their papers and discuss them. And this benefits everyone participating in the event. My research is self-explanatory by the title. I focus on a central issue, which is it continuity or is it change and transformation in China's policy on the Arab Gulf states? The main idea is that the transformation needs continuity. Continuity is stronger than transformation. And of course, we have changes every now and then. So I have studied this phenomenon in a tri-party dynamic, the Arab Gulf, the US, and China. Of course, the Gulf does not represent just one party, but six parties. Each state has its own perception on continuity and change and its own evaluation of its relationship with China. And we cannot put Saudi Arabia and UAE in the same place as Oman and Qatar and other countries. But to facilitate the idea and make it simpler, I put it as a tri-party political dynamics. Another thing is that I have tried to depict the transformation and change that is going on in three or four areas of international relationship: economics, political, and defense and security. Because in each area you may find some more continuity compared to change, and in other areas you may find more change and transformation compared to continuity. So mainly in the political area where there is transformation, and in economy as well there is transformation, but in security and defense there is a rigid stance. So the US influence in this area has a great impact. This is the main idea that I want or attempt to depict through my paper. The another point was what is transformation and what is change. There was much written in this regard. I will try to give you a summary of that. To try to explain what I mean. Scholars and researchers talk about continuity versus change from various approaches. They say that foreign politics is witnessing both, and they have various local motivation or national motivations, local motivations, international motivations that are interchangeable dynamics. Influence or impact is not always interchangeable in economics, politics, but it has great impact. And this is what I would like to shed light on. Impact deteriorates or takes a step back when it comes to the US. Impact is not the same as it was when during the Cold War or during hegemony. So analysts use many sentences such as adaptation and restructuring and reorientation, transformation from various points of view. For example, the international trends, the transformations and the issue case, and the transformations in the agenda, and the comprehensive and regional transformations, and whether it is limited or general. And so change was studied in terms of its space and the beliefs in it by the political leadership. As I said, continuity prevails here. I will say what the Chinese say about continuity and change, and I here quote the elite. Jin Tao says that we will seek consistently on a foreign policy of peace, and we will decide our position and our policies on each case. This is the key as per its issue case, and we will support justice and fairness. This theory of a world in harmony under one sky. And Zeman says that transformation from a low-level position into moving to a regional, international area where there are pros. So he's an opportunist and a paradigmatic. And the sentence or the phrase that we use and we took from the US, the Americans, is assertive. Some people are more aggressive. Some people are more assertive in this regard. Jinping sheds the point, the main point on this. He is a transformational point between the older China and the newer China, and he studies the history of the ruling family and talks about this as well. Let's talk about impact or influence. Impact may be direct or indirect, implicit or explicit. It could be deterrent or executive, persuasion or enforcement. It comes from a high level or a low level, has credibility or does not have credibility, and in terms of its objective, it differs as well. Those who are impacted might be aware or unaware of it. So for our decision makers aware of what they are achieving when they say certain things. For example, Biden threatened clearly that if you do not pay attention to the ceilings of oil, we shall revise or review American policy. In what sense? So the goal has the responsibility of the deterrent position here, and I will tell you some phrases. You may receive them differently. The Minister of Foreign Affairs said Gulf countries need to balance their partnerships with the U.S. This is translated, and he talked about them in plural form, partners, and he said that they need to be vigilant on their stance with China. Another source says that Gulf countries, the Gulf states, are fragmenting the long-term strategic relationship with the U.S. The Undersecretary of the Ministry of Defense or Department of Defense says if things see a certain hindrance, then this will create security threats for us. And elevating the ceiling of cooperation with China, with Beijing, will result in lowering the ceiling of cooperation with the USA.
How far he goes down, from which level he goes down, and is he going to continue to go down, or I can prevent him from sliding to the bottom? This is a problem. In
the Cold War, we do not have a problem with China. We have the triangle and Kissinger's idea and theories of dichotomy between the Soviet Union and so on. The post-Cold War is our main concern here. So here are the ideas. It is creativity in managing this transformation and managing the contemporary problems with the specific mechanisms of China. It is a fruit of continuity and a proof of transformation and a barometer of the impact and its extent. And it is a strategic ambush, not a tactic. And it is a challenge to China to sponsor it. This is, this is the Saudi-Irani rapprochement. And where is the US's ability to annul it? It is an equation where there is an impacted and those impacted. And so when and has the impact been affected truly? It is a symbol of transformation and evading or running away from the continuity. Impact was at its lowest level, and it was of no fear, and fighting it off was not impossible, and you wouldn't even pay a high price for that. And so I attempted in these ideas that I showcase on the screen. I'm sorry, I cannot see from this far, so I will use my paper. So I try to see what are the US mechanisms used in influencing or influence and impact. The ideas is as you can see, and I'm sorry, it looks like I'm just reading, but it's because I cannot see. So pressure towards this maximum degree.
In time, in style,
He's speaking English now.
in language, in body language, take it whatever you want to.
It is pressure towards the security area, the system of the paradigm and the individuals. So security of the persons. And again, he is speaking English, economy and sociology and religion. These are red lines. 2. Influence in interpreting commitments And we have examples of that, such as the oil facilities in the Gulf states, and Biden not fulfilling the defense of these facilities. So it is a reinterpretation of commitment. This is our problem and not their problem. Also, change in strategy. Obama transformed away from us towards the Orient, and Trump continued, and Biden continues with that. So, as a core, we have lost the coreness in the US strategy. We have become marginal, and this is a huge impact, and also change in the arms policy. F-36 Patriot, it's not just about the weapons, but also the system of logistics, and we have seen that in the Yemeni war. Another point, which is changing the stance on Iran. This is complicated. The agreement of 15, was it as per the Gulf wanted or not? Could the Gulf could they have had a bigger part in that or not? Another thing is no longer giving sufficient military support for the Houthis, for example. Logistics are by the US, not the Saudis. So if the Saudis do not provide sufficient support, then all of this becomes obsolete, especially when it comes to defense. Another point is support towards peaceful solution in Yemen, direction of a peaceful solution in Yemen, and also the promotion of human rights. Of course, you know more about that than me. 9 is the
distorting of the image, of the personality, of the heritage, of the character. They dig in your history and to find anything to spoil it. At least in the image.
In the image, they distort the image of your society. 10, support towards normalization, or to push the Gulf towards normalization. This is also 12 sanctions. Some people think that the US wouldn't go to sanction.
Sanctions doesn't mean complete sanctions, which we experienced with Iraq or we experienced with Iran. بطريقة أو أخرى. الآن أنا أتي.
In a way or another.
We don't have any weaponry system to resist, to defend ourselves against the influence. Here they are. أول الروادع.
The first deterrent is the self-deterrent.
في strategic nuclear strategy what they call self-deterrence. أنت مردوع ذاتيا.
So you are self-deterrent. The US cannot relinquish the Middle East. America has self-deterrence. It is the prison of its position. It could benefit from its position, but we can benefit from its imprisonment in this position. Biden says that we will not depart and leave a void to be filled by China and Russia. Biden will not accept these players, and he says Iran might be there as well. So another self-deterrence here. Another point which is very important.
In the 60s, when I was a student for the BA, we used to talk about strategic American interest in the Middle East, في الشرق, ونحسبها economic, political, ideological, إلى آخره. المصالح الأمريكية دسمة.
There are lots of US interests.
Shouldn't be lulled by إنه they are becoming independent of oil. They still control international economy through oil, through the Middle East oil. tools أخرى. إذن المصالح الأمريكية, this is the idea, لا يمكن حمايتها.
The US interests can only be protected by the US itself. The Europeans wouldn't replace the Americans. So we have self-deterrence here to dispensing of energy. Of course, I have some information about shale oil, but shale oil is not economically viable, so it is not really worth it. Another point, if America withdraws, then there would be replacement.
أين هذه الست نقطة شانسر؟ واحد، إما أن تكون بنية خليجية.
It could be a Gulf structure, and this is far from reach or far-fetched, and there could be a Gulf Iranian approach, and this is also far-fetched, or a Gulf approach, non-US Gulf approach, and that is a possible alternative. We have the Soviet Union and China.
Exercise in the Arab Sea في بحر العرب بدون الخليجيين وبدون
without Gulf people, without the US, without India either. So the collective approach comes after that, or unilateral with the US. The US has options, either unilateral or a leadership position. They prefer the post-Cold War, meaning to have a leadership role, not unilateral. So going towards the Orient with more assertive and bigger steps. We are running towards the Orient, same as Iran, but quicker, faster. One of the states doing that is Iran. This is doubtless. So we're going to the Orient in order to deter the US. Another point is that the US is afraid of China escalating the South China Sea in Taiwan, and at the same time,
East يتحول إلى الكذا وأمريكا لا تريد ذلك والصين تقدر تعمل.
But the US does not want that, and China is capable of that. Another point is that the US is afraid of changing the balance of powers with Israel.
It's not practical. It could be any form of understanding without these new ideas of this triangle ولا الرباعي quadral جديدة. قد نخلق شيء.
We might create something with Turkey, for example. Thank you. 4. To confuse the US.
Understand what you were trying to tell me to influence me. يعني أنا أربكه بعدم إرباك.
I confuse them by not confusing them. They confuse me, so I confuse them.
هو يصبح الضحية.
So they become the victim. And this is the main goal for the Gulf states to go to neutrality. The main point after that is the mechanism of impact of China.
First, هاي جدا مهمة. United States is more valuable to China than the Gulf. هذه fact. Even in international politics, America is a priority. It is a strategic interest for the China. كتب الكثير فيها. 2.
A lot has been written in this regard. Washington is well aware of there are no political willpower and security without
place the United States at all. 3. تخشى الصين الخطأ في الطباعة من إحياء العرب.
China is afraid of Arabs reviving a political Cold War, a defensive war, as the same as what happened with the Soviet Union. Geopolitical application, this is the US impact. geopolitical application, and you are well aware of this three-party or four-party dynamic, and also the containment for the new affiliations in the Gulf region, the new passage, Iran, Saudi Arabia, Jordan, Israel. We might have other parties as well. One final point is China does not have allies, and this is a disaster of China. They do not have allies, and this is they have, of course, a military base in Djibouti. It's just a base. It's just a presence. It does not represent an ally. Another point is America escalating on the Taiwan front, and this is critical. Another point is
energy security. Energy security is an international good, and China lives on this international good. يعني common good. فإذا هي لن تأتي
So it will not have any threats to its energy threats. And so now I conclude with the main idea. The main idea, in a nutshell, continuity is the prevalent phenomenon, and transformation is the exclusion. Transformation is tactical and comes in stages. I am choosing words that might be a bit linguistically verbose and complicated, but they have certain meanings in certain cases. Also, the US impact is eroding, taking a step back, and this is important. The Arab Party is the most vulnerable towards impact as individuals and as groups. And they have minimal ways to deter impact, the impact of the US. China has more tools, and we are more or less armless. Arab influence on China's stances has more influence than the US because of the oil dynamic. Arabs are more responsive to the US impact compared to China, and the space for the Chinese movement is bigger to evade the impact.
influence. النقطة الأخيرة إن العرب.
One last point, Arabs are not a replacement for China to the US. And so China cannot replace the US for the Arabs as well, because we have different equations and different prices. Thank you.
طبعا نشكر الدكتور كاظم على هذه المشاركة المثمرة، وننتقل إلى مشاركة المتحدث الثاني، وهو الباحث كازوتا ماتسودا، وهو طالب دكتوراه في جامعة صوفيا في اليابان بورقة علمية
of Japan, in which talking and his paper will be discussing the tripartite political dynamics in the GCC. Mr. Kazu Tomo, in which talk about the relations between Japan, China, and the GCC states, where he will shed the light on how policymakers view the strategical locations of both countries. Mr. Kazutomo, the floor is yours.
Express my gratitude to the Arab Center for Research and Policy Studies for hosting this event, and I'd like to thank you for all the fellow speakers for the very insightful discussion so far on the U.S. The China Gulf relations, and also the role that the U.S. is playing in the overall picture of their relations. My paper attempts to shed light on the conceptual limitation of the U.S.-China dualistic understanding. Okay, I repeat again. My paper attempts to shed light on the conceptual limitation of the US-China dualistic understanding of the external power politics in the Gulf region, particularly the GCC states. By offering a discussion on the positionality of Japan, another key East Asian state actor in the increasingly deepening Gulf East Asia nexus in recent years. In the context of the GCC states' alliance choice, the US-China dichotomy is a prevailing concept for discussion among scholars, policymakers, and media alike. For example, a prevailing argument often reads that the US influence in the Gulf region is on its demise. Obviously, Biden administration is downgrading the US commitment in the Middle East, including the Gulf. But the argument continues by saying that the US influence will not completely go away, and it will continue to be the Gulf states' important security partner, with the presence of a number of US military bases in the Gulf region, exemplified by the Al Udeid Air Force Base here in Qatar and the US Navy's Fifth Fleet in Bahrain. At the same time, the same argument goes on by stating that China's influence in the Gulf region is on the rise in economic and in a more recent context, diplomatic spheres. All of us have witnessed it over the past year. Researchers over the past decade or two have repeatedly pointed out the GCC states' increasing turn from the west to the east, including East Asia. This policy orientation is often conceptualized by such terms as the GCC states' look east policy, pivot to Asia, or discussed in the context of the hedging strategy to diversify the heavy reliance on the West, particularly, of course, the United States. In the economic sphere, this became increasingly visible as the volume of trade between the GCC states and East Asia increased. As Dr. Jonathan mentioned yesterday, Japan, China, South Korea, and India are the major export destinations for the GCC states in recent years. In the diplomatic sphere, we can observe the emergence of several new dialogue initiatives between the GCC states and East Asian countries over the past year. This is exemplified by the inauguration of the China GCC summit in Riyadh in December 2022, and the first Japan GCC foreign ministers meeting in Riyadh in September this year. China's mediation in the Saudi-Iranian deal this March is, of course, yet another example of the rising influence of the East Asian countries in the Gulf region, primarily the GCC states. East Asian countries are not relevant political players in today's interstate politics in the Gulf region. However, the over-focus on the US-China bipolarity often leads to an incomplete dualistic view towards the great power competition in the region. That is, whether the GCC states should strengthen their ties with the US or China, as if they only had two options to choose from. This dualistic understanding is sometimes problematic for two reasons. First, such a dualistic view can lead to a reductionism in an analytical sense. Indeed, the US-China dichotomy, although it does exist, largely overlooks other relevant and important external powers, including East Asian countries and primarily Japan, which is the case of this study. Second, the dualistic view also overlooks the existence of the intra-East Asian political and economic dynamics, and also the competition in the GCC states that is increasingly at play in recent years. The East Asian competition is valid, pivotal factor to grasp a more complete picture of the deepening nexus between the GCC states and East Asia, especially in the 21st century. China is not the only Asian political and economic partner for the GCC states. Other Asian powers, Japan, South Korea, and India, have also been strengthening their relations with the GCC states accordingly. Here, what I want to also emphasize is that the more East Asian countries try to deepen their relations with the GCC states with sometimes overlapping or conflicting approaches, the more the intra-East Asian competition in the Gulf region and also in the GCC states becomes fierce and visible. China's interaction with Japan in the Gulf region is no exception to this. Indeed, the GCC states' political relations with East Asia are not necessarily entirely homogeneous, and that is also another important point that I'd like to highlight. Often competition rather than cooperation characterizes the intra-East Asian dynamics in the GCC states and also the regions beyond that, including the Indo-Pacific these days. For both Japan and China, the GCC states are strategically important because of a number of factors, not just one, not just energy. But among these factors, it's of course, we have to acknowledge that it is the Gulf hydrocarbons. The security of the supply of Gulf hydrocarbon is pivotal and is crucial for Japan's and China's domestic economies and their growth. This is particularly so for Japan, which relies more than 90% of its oil import from the GCC states in the past years. Another factor is the lucrative economic opportunities that we can see in the GCC states. The GCC states' economic diversification programs have opened up various new business opportunities in non-hydrocarbon sectors as well. These non-hydrocarbon sectors include clean energy, medicine, and space exploration. And in these fields already we can see the emerging cooperation between the GCC states in Japan, the GCC states in China, and GCC states and South Korea. The geostrategic location of the GCC states on the world map is also another important factor. The Gulf region is located at the crossroad between Asia and Africa, through which a large number of tankers travel every day. Considering these factors, China incorporated the GCC states in its strategic calculation of the Belt and Road Initiative announced in 2013. I will not delve into the detail of the Belt and Road Initiative because it was discussed in depth yesterday. But my point is that a few years later, Japan did the same in its free and open Indo-Pacific foreign policy framework, which Japan's former Prime Minister Shinzo Abe formally announced in 2016, 3 years after the formal announcement of the Belt and Road Initiative. And this free and open Indo-Pacific is a de facto counter policy against China's Belt and Road Initiative. And we can see overlapping similarities between the two inter-regional foreign policy frameworks. A similar pattern also occurred recently. China held the China GCC summit in December 2022, and only 9 months later, Japan held the first Japan GCC foreign ministers meeting, as I mentioned. For Tokyo, China's expanding role in the GCC states is increasingly becoming an external challenge that cannot be overlooked. Indeed, Japan's Ministry of Foreign Affairs recently published a diplomatic blue book explicitly states that to many of us a surprise that China's increasing political, economic, and military influence is "quote unquote" the biggest strategic challenge to Japan's peace and security. And Japan did not, by the way, explicitly identify China as such in the past foreign policy documents. So this is a change that we can observe. 20 years ago, China library in the GCC state or the Gulf region was not so visible. And it was largely confined in the economic sector. But these kinds of evidence that I pointed out clearly indicate that there is an increasingly fierce competition between the two sides. And the competition is becoming more and more visible over the last 10 years or so. All these factors cannot be conceptually accommodated by the US-China dichotomy. So it is imperative to broaden the dichotomy and encompass other relevant external state actors. But in doing so, we shall ask ourselves, how do other external state actors fit into the picture of the US-China dichotomy? In the context of this paper, the question would be, what is Japan's positionality in GCC states' strategic calculations compared to China or the US? What strategic advantages can Japan offer for the GCC states is also another relevant and salient question for discussion. But in discussing Japan's positionality in the GCC states, first it should be acknowledged that Japan would not be the most ideal partner when it comes to the provider of hard power security for the GCC states. Japan's pacifist constitution and the domestic opposition inside Japan against the provision of lethal weapons to external countries, among other factors, make it very hard for Japan to position itself as a security guarantor for the GCC states. That said, from other perspectives, namely diplomatic and economic perspectives, there's room for consideration. From the diplomatic perspective, first, Japan is an ally of the US, which makes it more advantageous than China in the eyes of the GCC states. At the end of the day, the US hard power presence continues to be here in the GCC states and the Gulf in the Gulf region. The GCC states that host the US military bases, like Qatar, seem to be more cautious about strengthening its political cooperation with China. Second, the enhancement of bilateral relations with Japan does not come with a political or economic compromise for the GCC states in such forms as introducing more, let's say, democratic elements in domestic politics. And that is not often the case for the US, as we saw it in different parts of the world. Third, with Japan, the GCC states can do further hedging beyond the US and China, while not intimidating Iran. Unlike the US, Japan maintains amicable relations with both sides of the Gulf, the GCC states and Iran. And also, it is also important to highlight that in the maritime domain, Japan, most specifically its self-defense force, is increasingly making independent moves from the US in the cases of rising political tensions in the Strait of Hormuz, exemplified by the oil tanker attacks in 2019. And this is a stark difference, let's say, compared to to the 1991, the Gulf War, when the U.S. followed the Japan followed the U.S. request to send the minesweeper. But now, in recent years, what we see is that increasingly Japan is making a certain degree of distance from the U.S. When it comes to the maritime security in the Strait of Hormuz and also the surrounding areas. The fact that the majority of the GCC states, the fact that the majority of the citizens of the GCC states has a very positive impression towards Japan, thanks to the Japanese popular culture, as you all know, animes and manga as such, and Japan's decades of public diplomacy vis-a-vis the GCC states and the Arab world may also be another advantageous element compared to China. In the economic sphere, Japanese technology ranging from energy saving, Japan is reputed for its energy saving technology because the country has no hydrocarbon resources, so they have to save somehow with the technology as much as they can to save energy consumption for the sake of the country's national security. And also seawater desalination and space exploration. Japanese technology is widely known. And in these sectors, I see that the country has a potential for contribution to the GCC states' economic diversification program. All these factors indicate that other external powers than the US and China have also much to offer for the GCC states. In my study, I discussed Japan as a case study, but other Asian powers may also have their own advantages in various domains for the GCC states. Let me come back to my main point. Again, the reducing Gulf external power politics to the mere dichotomy of the US-China competition has conceptual limitations. As I highlighted, there is intra-East Asian competition in the Gulf region and also in the GCC states, and it is an important element when discussing the GCC states' political and economic relationship building with external powers. While the GCC states continue to face the difficult task of balancing with external powers, they have much wider options for strategic partners beyond the US and China. In other words, their strategic relationship building selection is not necessarily limited to the juristic question of whether the US or China or nobody else. Other external powers such as Japan can also fit into the picture of the shifting diplomatic and economic landscape of the GCC states. Thank you.
Thank you so much for your enrichment participation in this session. And I'm really thrilled with what you just said about Japan, just adding a new dimension to the correlation with the GCC countries, especially that Japan jumping over Germany in the GDP recently. We really learned a lot of what you just said. Thank you so much. والآن ننتقل إلى الضيف الثالث في هذه.
Now to our next guest, Mr. Aftab Alam, an academic and a researcher in the the University of Abdulwali Khan, Pakistan. His paper is on China GCC ties, evolving challenges and dynamics for Pakistan. He will be adding a dimension on the impact of relationships between China and GCC in Pakistan through focusing on three dimensions: economics, geostrategies, and diplomacy. Thank you.
for giving me opportunity to talk in such an intellectual and important session, and also thankful to the Arab Center for Research and Policy Studies to give us opportunity. My research topic in my paper, China's GCC ties, evolving challenges and dynamics for Pakistan. Is for introduction of my research papers that China expanding economics and diplomatic engagement with the Gulf Cooperation Council, impact of China-GCC relations on Pakistan in three main dimensions: economic, geostrategic, and diplomatic implications. This includes the potential for increased trade volumes, infrastructure development projects, and energy cooperation, particularly in form of oil imports. The study also explored the influence of China-GCC ties on regional stability and security, a potential counterbalance to the influence of other powers in the region, like US. The research also includes case studies like China Belt and Route initiatives and its implications for Pakistan and GCC, and China-Pakistan economic corridor and its role in regional connectivity. In terms of geostrategic implication, the China-GCC ties boosting regional stability. Diplomatically, the research underscores Pakistan's elevated diplomatic standing, particularly in the Muslim world, because of the close relationship between China and the GCC. China and Pakistan relations Pakistan is strategically located at the crossroad of Central Asia, and South Asia has long been a very important and main player in Chinese international strategies. Pakistan's strategic value to China is its geographical location, which connects one side with the Middle East, and on the other side, it's connected with the Central Asian's rich resources. Shifting nature of China influence in the Middle East, evolving from geo-economic interest to more pronounced geostrategic involvement. The recent engagement has been particularly notable. In three key areas of cooperation: China-Pakistan Economic Corridor, Gwadar Port Project, and Iran-Pakistan gas pipeline. Conflict-free relation since 1951 and considered as all-weather friends. Pakistan-China relations. China and Pakistan share strategic interests that guide their bilateral cooperation. These include concern about India, counter-terrorism efforts, robust military-to-military relations, and economic ties. And there are some key pillars of Pakistan-China alliance. Both countries pursue India as a main concern in their geopolitical calculus. Combating terrorism and ensuring domestic stability constitute shared objectives of both countries. China-GCC relationship, complexity in BRI engagement. China-BRI engagement with GCC countries marked by complexity and challenges due to security issues in the Taliban, terrorism, and so many other terrorist activities in Balochistan, and especially in the Gwadar area, from where China is trying to make a pipeline towards the Kashgar, which is a very nearest route for the Chinese to develop the Chinese, to improve the Chinese resources and to improve the Chinese investment. In BRI, Belt and Route Initiative, the Trans-Caspian Corridor and access to European market, especially through countries like Turkey, are key interests for China BRI ambition. Deepening economic ties. China actually seek to deepen economic ties and infrastructure development with the GCC, because China in this context need the importance of China and for Pakistan is that China, the world market is needed Chinese products, and most of the recently just a few days ago, I have studied a paper, and more than 65% products are sold in United States of America by the Chinese companies. So it's mean that the world is demanding Chinese product, and on the basis of that, these industries, the Chinese industry need oil and gas for the production to fulfill the world demand. And for that purpose, they need the safe routes to get these oil resources and energy resources from the Gulf states. So in this context, Pakistan, the strategic location of Pakistan is very much important. Pakistan historical engagement with the China and the GCC. China's engagement with the GCC state has gained momentum over the years, and Pakistan play a vital role in facilitating and shaping this relationship. China is a major importer of oil and natural gas, and the GCC countries are significant suppliers of these resources. Energy security needs China investment in GCC. And China is trying to invest in the GCC's countries for their oil and resources security. And for that purpose, Pakistan is a strategic partner of both China, and several GCC's countries hold a unique position in facilitation this relationship. The economic dimension in this context is very much related to the CPEC. China investment in the Gulf region, particularly in energy sector, to ensure resources security and energy sufficiency. This deepening energy cooperation amplifies China economic and geopolitical influence under the importance of a stable energy supply chain. The goals for BRI, Belt and Road initiatives, foster economic connectivity between China and the GCC states, create new trade routes, infrastructure, and catalyze regional economic growth. China significant investment in the Gulf region. The GCC states crucial for Chinese resource security and energy sufficiency. China is the primary importer of oil, Gulf oil. Trades between China and the GCC is a remarkable growth. What are the implications on Pakistan? The deepening economic ties between China and the GCC countries bear multifaceted implication for Pakistan. China's growing dependence emphasizes the importance of a secure energy supply chain. Economic collaboration impact. Strengthening economic collaboration between China and GCC hold promising prospect for Pakistan. Strategic initiatives for Pakistan aligning CPEC with China GCC projects can catalyze economic integration. Actively exploring export diversification to both China and the GCC is crucial. A diplomatic role for Pakistan. Leveraging historical ties, Pakistan can serve a mediator in China GCC relations. Implications for Pakistan critical role. China-Pakistan economic corridor, they are making different power plants and pipelines that facilitates the flow of energy resources from GCC to China. They are developing the Gwadar port in the Balochistan province, which provide alternative routes to China, reducing its reliance on the state of Malacca. And there are also some challenges facing by this particular route, which are the Chinese companies are making in the shape of CPECs. security risk, China influence in the Gulf region, concern for the United States, geopolitical competition in the region, particularly with Iran and India, and some environmental implications of climate issues and disasters, floods issues. The diplomatic and political relationship, China mediation in regional conflicts and disputes. And recently we have the Saudi-Iran resolutions. Investment in infrastructure projects, Saudi-Iran agreement, reduce Western influence, particularly US. Pakistan diplomatic contribution to strengthen China GCC ties, geographical location, CPEC, and regional stability and its shifting global geopolitical landscape. Security collaboration, peaceful growing China, a significant shift towards the multipolarity. China entered into defense agreement, arms sale, and conducted military exercise with GCC member states. Pakistan also has similar agreement with China and GCC countries. Challenges for Pakistan, GCC internal feuds, Iran, Saudi tensions, Yemen conflict, and Pakistan neutrality in this context. GCC, China, Pakistan security nexus, balance maintained to avoid regional conflict. Pakistan is trying to work as a balancer between these two, the GCC countries and China. Shaping the future Pakistan vision for China GCC relation, Pakistan comprehensive collaboration in various domains, confidence building measures and dialogue mechanism to mitigate tension and promote peace in the region. China GCC relations under climate change and renewable energy initiatives. China Pakistan will also help to facilitate the Chinese companies to bring solar energy and so many other to transform the Gulf region from the oil and gas dependence towards the renewable energy. Diplomacy and conflict resolution, Pakistan is also helping in that context between the two states. So it means that Pakistan is working as a facilitator between these the two states. Economic integration and sustainable development, regional stability, prosperity, and cooperation. Regional implications, scenarios, and policy recommendations. The future of China GCC relations carries substantial regional implications that necessitate careful consideration and proactive policy measures. China collaboration with the GCC nation intensifies across multiple dimensions, including defense, trade, and energy. As a response, Iran may strengthen its ties with other regional powers, which is a potential challenge to stability. Pakistan should pursue diplomatic approach to promote dialogue and conflict resolution in the region. GCC countries should diversify their economies, reducing reliance merely on hydrocarbon exports. Scenario 2, US-China competition. Increased chances of polarization. Pakistan may face heightened pressures. Pakistan should maintain balance between regional and major power in this context. GCC countries should enhance regional cooperation under umbrella of Gulf Cooperation Council. Sustainable development, China, GCC, Pakistan cooperation for sustainable development, energy collaboration, contribute energy security, environmental sustainability, trade facilitation mechanism, reducing trade barriers. In conclusion, China's engagement in GCC contributes developments of new geopolitical landscape. Security cooperation between GCC and China gave rise to new security dimension. Pakistan's role is crucial in emerging scenario. CPEC can connect China, Pakistan, and GCC peace and stability is mandatory, which Pakistan should ensure in this context. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Scholar Aftab, for your participation. بعد الاستماع إلى هذه المشاركة.
After we have just completed the three informative and constructive presentation in which they discussed the different domains that will open the floor for questions for our distinguished guest. The floor is yours. In case you have any questions. A very good morning to you all. I would like just to hear comment on and actually, as something Mr. Kadam said, the way you have analyzed the situation was good, but it was built on some introductions that you have relied on are subject to discussion. If we disagree on the introduction, this will lead to disagreement or differences and the outcomes. When you said that China doesn't have alliance or doesn't have any allies, this is based on the, as you know, in the core of China's philosophy, they don't have any allies. This is what you said, that the first option requires a profound analysis and requires a revision to the China's philosophy in order to prove that China, its philosophy doesn't have allies or not. It does. Whereas this contradicts reality. China, we have Shanghai Institution for Security and Collaboration, which has a very important international role. At the same time, China is the key founder of BRICS, which represent more than 30% of the world economy and the world population. So these are two coalitions that make China play a very leading role. This is just, I'd like to add, thank you so much. Let's collect the questions first and then we will give answers.
شكرا أشكركم على الأوراق. I
would like to thank you for your informative presentation. I think there's a topic that we have not discussed yesterday or today, which is the dimension related to Chinese debt trap, which is a trap set by China for underdeveloped country or poor countries under the PRI, which includes 50 countries where China gave them loans, especially countries in Asia and Africa, including Pakistan and Sri Lanka. Laos, there are creditors from China. Then China exploits the failure of these countries to pay back these loans or debts. Then they will be subject to some compromises, or they are actually blackmailed by China. As I said yesterday, even with Iran, China received or import oil from Iran with a very cheap cost. At the same time, China, I have no idea how much it invested in Iran, less than 10 billion since they signed the agreement in 2021. So the question, how this kind of this very malicious Chinese policy, when it gives money to these countries in the form of loans. Even in Oman, China is investing more than $10 billion in building seaport Dugum, which is located in a strategic location at the Arab Sea. 37 countries are creditors who received credit loans from China. So the question, how can China use this kind of policy as a leverage? Dr. Kadam, you have raised this point because these underdeveloped countries, especially African countries, including Pakistan, so the question to Mr. Aftab, do you have an idea about this kind of debt trap China that set it for Pakistan? Is it as we witnessed in Sri Lanka in 2021? Sri Lanka failed to pay back these laws of debt. Would that affect this big PRI initiative, which includes three-quarters of the world countries? Yes, first use. We can receive further questions. Are there any other questions?
تفضل تفضل إن شاء الله.
بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. شكرا.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Dr. Kadam,
جميل الحقيقة.
You have raised a very interesting points, and theoretically they are correct, but they required more validation and justification. But here I'd like to raise a question or ask one for your efforts. First, what are the guarantees for relations between you have made different quotes, but in politics, is there any something guaranteed? Who can guarantee when the official says something that he would do it or not? What kind of guarantees that should be submitted? I think actions are the guarantees, not the talks, the words. The words are not the guarantees. The actions are. Second question here. What about the GSCC? What the GSCC should do regarding all these variables? Do we have in the GCC to listen to what they say or to think of what we need to say? Thank you. Mr. Kazu. Mr. Kazuto. هل تعتقد أن العلاقة الصين بدول الخليج العربي العلاقة الصينية
will reflect negatively to the relation between GCC and Japan? And in which regard, economically or from the political issues? And what strategy, the second question, what strategy you think Japan should implement for the new relation? Because we know that Japan, they have a strong relation with the GCC, as you said. But now today in the new trend, now it's competition. It's a big market now. All countries, they need to market their product, their service, their ideas, their ideology in our environment. So what do you think Japan should do in this regard? Thank you. شكرا.
السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته. يوسف بن حمد من عمان.
Yusuf bin Hamad from Oman. I would like to thank our three speakers. Dr. Fathim, your presentation looks like a poem, actually. We have used a very eloquent language. I have a specific question to Mr. Kadhim. He said about now we are, as Dr. Shaiji highlighted and Dr. Muhammad Misfi al-Najjar, and I believe Dr. Majid will speak more about it. You mentioned China, USA, and GCC and the Arab countries, but we are other key players within this formula. Either Europe, this elderly, or Russia or Japan. So this combination in which we can determine these very difficult balances. As you know, Japan is a very major industrial power and influential, which has contributed to the China's emerging power as well. That's why the G7, each of these countries seeks to establish a relationship with the different markets or access different markets to fulfill their interests. Question: why Japan, which yet it has different has a lot of advantages economically, or does not do what China is doing. Yet it is very important economic part, and we just why don't Japan do what China is doing in terms of strategical or economical aspects? So you're asking why doesn't Japan follow suit? I'm Mohammed Hajri from Oman. I have a question to Dr. Aftab.
Silly question, but I just would like to know if you could give us an update on China-Pakistan economic corridor, and also the Pakistani's government position towards China post Imran Khan and their position on these different projects, how they look at China and their investments. If you could just give us a little update on that. Thank you very much.
Mr. Aftab, as you know, historically there's an alliance between Pakistan and China, but recently we have witnessed the USA's pressure or pressing on Russia to move away from this coalition or alliance with Russia and China. So would Pakistan respond to America's pressure in order to move away from its alliance with Russia and China?
شكرا جزيلا.
I would like to thank you. I meant talk about the presence, the military presence of China in the GCC, not in general. Maybe I have not used the proper word. I have authored different books about the Chinese strategy. It's unlike USA here. Yesterday, Dr. Al-Shaij, he actually addressed the different milestones of the American presence in the GCC, including the military bases, but he did not talk about the weaponry. So the third implication, as you know, China has a presence in Djibouti as a first, which is, we name it as a pearl. Actually, India promoted, in spite of India doesn't have any power in the maritime aspect. So they have. Yesterday, we were talking about the collaboration between United Arab Emirates and building this new port. USA said that they are tapping, or there was a kind of, like in Israel, same time America protests that there's tapping them or interference. As we know, China do exist in Shanghai, and Saudi Arabia will join Shanghai. Egypt is present, and the BRICS. You are right. Isn't that is it a superficial presence, not an effective one? For example, China doesn't have airplane carrier that exists in this part of the world. At the same time, there's military training exercise between Saudi Arabia and other countries. So I hope that have used accurate language based on the philosophy that the presence is the military presence. Dr. Abdul Shaji, when he pointed to debt trap, yesterday was a victim of what Dr. Abdul Shaji presumed. Yesterday, I read an essay issued by Chatham House. This is a myth.
Google إنه debt.
The debt trap is a myth, it's not reality. Here we are focusing on the Central Asia, where I have tried to study how much these countries are in debt to China based on the BRI. Only one country who has fallen into this trap. What is the implication of this debt trap? And Dr. Shaiji has pointed out to this. First, China doesn't actually stipulate any terms or conditions in the loan contract, and they accept bartering. You can swap it or exchanging oil, cotton. Fifth, there's a relief of debt. But Dr. Shaiji, he would like to raise this point that China set a conceived terms and conditions. First would demand one China policy, Taiwan. Same time, it requests that nobody will highlight the Tibet to be secession, and at the same time to support in international forums and platforms. They request those in debt to China to support her in different UN platforms. As I said 3 days ago, I was a victim of this debt for years. Now the argument, the title. This is the title of the article, that this trap is a myth. We can discuss later. I know Colombia, Pakistan, another example. This can be further discussed. What I said of the last thing, yes, I used to teach my students debt trap. There are so many cases, Colombia, Pakistan. What about the GCC? GCC countries are very rich countries. They cannot fall into this kind of trap. Now we'll move to the other question. When he asked me to provide him with an evidence, as I said at the beginning, I have reached these conclusions after they have studied 3 domains. Politics, the second domain is economics, and yesterday and today our colleagues have offered different information. Same in defense and security. This is the fatal factor, and especially in the GCC. The British used to say, if a Russian sneezes in the Gulf, this is during 2004-2006. If a Russian sneeze in the GCC, UK will get affected and have cold. So this can apply to USA. If China sneeze in the GCC, America will get cold. So there are different evidences available. I will give you another example here. Biden, you remember, he talked about Trump used this very inflammatory rhetoric and vicious rhetoric, and he used a very harmful rhetoric when he addressed Saudi Arabia, and even addressed the Arab world. He used a very harmful rhetoric and language. There are so many evidence. Last point, which is the key players or key actors. Yes, there are other actors that affect the dynamics. Those key key actors are marginal. They are not profoundly involved or to do something strategically important. For example, I said that we can go to East. What about now? Countries started to plan to join Shanghai Convention or BRICS. This will result in the emergence of new players. We need to adopt a strategy to respond to any effect. So the question, what should we do? This is a major question in which you have highlighted, and I understand that, and this cannot be discussed in this forum. Can we walk in silos or collectively? This is the question. Thank you. If you walk individually, how can each and every country can make its political decision?
You can start with answering the question for you within 3 minutes limit for both of you. You and the scholar after, please.
Thank you for your questions. Regarding the first question on whether the enhancement of China GCC states would negatively affect Japan's relations with the GCC states, my answer is no. It is not likely that Japan would consider the GCC states as, let's say, a potential an enemy, let's say, for Japan if the GCC states choose to deepen its relations with the GCC states. Why? Doing so would be against the energy security of Japan. As I mentioned, Japan still relies more than 90% of its oil imports from the Gulf, from the GCC state, not just the Gulf, excluding Iran, only the GCC member states. So considering the GCC states as unfriendly partners would go against Japan's national interest. And in addition to that, Japan has maintained for decades very amicable relations with all of the GCC states. But I would also like to point out that if the GCC states go too close to China, it will fuel the already existing intra-East Asian competition in the region. This also includes South Korea as well. Japan, China, South Korea in a fierce competition in the political and economic spheres, as I mentioned in my speech. Regarding your next question concerning what strategy can Japan implement? Over the past years, Japan has been actively building a cooperation framework with each of the GCC states. And this includes, let's say, in a very recent context, in this July when the Japan's Prime Minister Fumio Kishida visited Qatar, they upgraded relations from a comprehensive partner to strategic partner, and then they identified a set of specific sectors for bilateral cooperation. So now that over the past 10 years, they have this development of the cooperation framework, but what should Japan strategically do now vis-a-vis the GCC states is the actual implementation of this framework. And this we are seeing increasingly. For example, Japan had the first military-to-military dialogue with Qatar just last month. So we see the content, not just the bone, but we're seeing the meat of the strengthening, the further diversification, strengthening of Japan Gulf States, and I'm sure that we will see more in the coming years. Okay, thank you.
Thank you so much for the questions. For the first question is concerned, so this is a difference between the other countries and the China, which given loan to the Pakistan. China is not giving loan, but they are investing. They have signed $46 billion for CPEC and other projects, but they are not giving it to the Pakistani government, just like the other United States have given in the past and just the other countries. China is investing. They are making different economic zones. They are making different hydropower dams and all of these things by their own self. And the Chinese workers, Chinese engineers, and all of these, they are working there in that particular projects. So the second question is for the Imran Khan and his government concern. So Imran Khan, he was a popular leader in Pakistan and basically a sportsman. And due to political instability, now he is in prison, and his policies towards the Muslim world, he's trying for making the Muslim world unite. And he's followed the very prominent leader of the Bacha Khan, who was a Pashtun leader, and he have worked that when the Muslim world united and we can make a peaceful coexistence in this region, so it will be better for the prosperity and all. So Imran Khan is basically following that particular agenda, but unfortunately due to political instability, military coup, and that's why now he is in prison, and there is very instability between the states and the local people right now.
Thank you, Scholar Aftab, for your answering the questions. شكرا للضيوف على مشاركة.
I would like to thank our dear guest, and I would like to thank you for interventions, and peace and blessing of God be upon you.